2, 1.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good evening, Ramadan Mubarak to each and every one of you. My name is Sulaiman Ba, and I'm the Community Engagement and Outreach Coordinator here at Minaratain, the Education City Mosque here at Qatar Foundation. And it's my pleasure to welcome all of you watching to a special edition of Qatar Foundation's Education City Speaker Series this Ramadan. So it's a special Ramadan edition. As our guest speaker today will join us and explain how the holy month of Ramadan can help us to recognize how we can all serve humanity and also provide us with the tools that can contribute to addressing the challenges that our own communities and global society face. It is my pleasure to welcome Dalia Mogahed, Director of Research at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. She's a leading thinker, researcher, educator, and commentator on the Muslim world. And we're delighted that she is here with us for this Ramadan edition of the Education City Speaker Series. Sister Dalia, welcome and Ramadan Mubarak.
Welcome, thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and Ramadan Kareem back to you. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. To the audience, we'll also be taking your questions in a 20-minute question and answer session. So the format is we will have a conversation with Sister Dalia for about 40 minutes, and towards the end, we will take a 20-minute Q&A. So please use the Q&A section of this webinar to post your questions. And if you want to post about tonight's topic on your own social media, please do use the hashtag EC Speaker Series. With that said, I'd like to begin and ask the first question to you, Sister Dalia. What is the true meaning and essence of Ramadan? And beyond the Muslim world, what are some of the misconceptions about what this holy month means?
Thank you so much, first of all, for having me on this very special speaker series and for taking up this incredibly important topic during the holy month. And it's a huge honor to have been selected to do this speaker series, especially during this month. When I think about what is the essence, the true essence of Ramadan, I really go back to the Quran, where we are told that Allah prescribed fasting to us as He has prescribed it to others before us, so that we may learn God consciousness. What Ramadan really means, in my mind, its true essence is about learning to put our conscience over our drives, learning to put ethics before our impulses. And that's that incredibly difficult but essential skill that is honed for 30 days every year can be truly the seed of a transformed society, because you're working on all of the drives that lead to oppression, to not helping those who are less fortunate, all the drives like, seeking power and unchecked anger and the desire to dominate. These really have to be what we restrain and learn to manage during Ramadan. And really that is the foundation and the heart of societal and social justice transformation. You mentioned also what are the misconceptions about Ramadan. I think the biggest misconception is that it's, I think a lot of people who don't who don't experience it firsthand probably look from the outside in as, here's a bunch of people going hungry and thirsty all day, and how sorry we feel for them. But there's always this expression of incredible pity without a recognition of the deep spiritual transformations that really truly can happen during this month. So I think looking at it in a very limited light as a practice where Muslims are forced to do something uncomfortable, maybe even quote unquote unhealthy, just because their religion is so demanding and difficult, and without any recognition of the benefits, first spiritually, but even physically to your health, of fasting. And I think, if the true essence of Ramadan and of fasting and of all the aspects of Ramadan, I mean, fasting is just one of them, were to be understood, I think there would be a much greater respect and admiration for this time of the year.
Very well said. I think I'm not 100% sure if it's an Arabic saying, but I've heard this said many times, that you can only know something by its opposite. So what you just mentioned here, if we don't experience this hunger and thirst, then how would we actually even know that it's a blessing and appreciate it? So instead of pity, like you said, it should be more of a sense of, gratitude and sense of wonder that we actually choose to do the fast, and we actually choose to give up the food and the water and other aspects of the worship, keeping our patience and controlling ourselves. So this is the first Ramadan for several years, alhamdulillah, after 2 difficult years for the whole world with the pandemic. This is the first Ramadan for several years where the relaxation of the COVID-19 restrictions has allowed communities to actually meet and gather more easily. And so how do you feel that these restrictions then affect the spirit of Ramadan, and what are the most important aspects of the holy month that we have regained this year?
Well, I have to say that Ramadan truly is my favorite time of the year, and one of those reasons is because no other time do I feel such a great sense of community, especially here in the United States, among American Muslims. And so for the past 2 years, in many ways we lost that, especially year one, 2020, where everything was in total lockdown and we weren't able to gather. We weren't able to feel that sense of community. We were, in some ways, there were advantages of that, that first Ramadan where it forced us into almost like a month-long i'tikaf. And so this solitude does have its benefits, but Islam is definitely a faith that demands congregation, that demands community, that is built on a sense of solidarity and togetherness, and Ramadan builds that. And so with us now going back to the mosque and iftars and gatherings, I think having been deprived of that for so long, for 2 years, we are appreciating it even that much more. And I want to just take a minute to maybe reflect a little bit about the importance of community. And, we haven't felt that in a while. Why is community important? Why is it so important to feel a part of a greater whole? I'm reminded of this beautiful scene that occurred during the Isra wal Mi'raj. And if you recall, this miraculous story, this miraculous event happened after the year of sadness, right? The year of sorrow, where the Prophet ﷺ lost the 2 dearest people to him. And rather than be allowed to grieve in peace, he was harassed and ridiculed and assaulted physically on several occasions by the Meccan elite. Now it was sort of open season because he had lost his protection. And so this alienation and this rejection by his own people, by his own tribe, by his own family. And it was such a painful experience. And so when Allah wanted to mend his heart, the first thing that happened in the Isra wal Mi'raj experience, if you remember, after he was taken miraculously from Mecca to Jerusalem, before he ascended to the highest heaven, he led Salah for 140,000 messengers and prophets. He was given his true community and embraced as its leader. You have the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam and Musa alayhi salam and Isa alayhi salam and all of the others whose names we don't even know, waiting for him, ushering him to the front as their leader. It was as if Allah was responding to that alienation and that rejection by his own blood by telling him, these are your people, the best of humanity. Consider you a brother and consider you a leader. And that part of his healing had to occur before he could ascend to the highest heaven. And I think there's a lesson in that, because I think so often in our very hyper individualistic societies, we think we don't need community. We think we can do it on our own. And isolation can be one of the most dangerous things to our mental health and even to our physical health. And I think Ramadan is a yearly reminder of that need of community, that we need to build that community and foster it and strengthen it.
Yes, indeed. And you talked about that night journey, that special night journey from Mecca to Jerusalem. So talking about then a journey, since Ramadan is also an individual experience for everybody, from a young person learning to fast just, at 8 years old, trying to, be, accepted and recognized, that they're able to kind of, do the same thing as adults in the household. Do you feel we recognize this aspect of Ramadan enough to a sufficient extent, or do we place more emphasis on our own journeys of reflection without necessarily understanding how Ramadan helps, others? So it's not just about us.
Yeah, I actually think that sometimes there is, in some cases, an overemphasis on the individual aspect. Now, the individual aspect I want to emphasize is the beginning, is the heart of it. We can't branch out until we've worked on ourselves. And the Quran calls us to purify ourselves, not to go and purify everybody else. We have to start inside. Mm-hmm. But sometimes we stop there. It's not only where we start, but it's also where we stop. And there isn't a great enough emphasis on our social responsibility, on the need to reach out and give back. I mean, one of the most beautiful teachings about Ramadan is that the Prophet ﷺ was described as generous as the wind during Ramadan. And I love this imagery because this was a farming society. This was in Medina where he was described this way. Of course, Ramadan as a prescribed fast didn't come until the first year of Hijrah. So it was after Mecca. This was all in Medina. And he's described as being as generous as the wind in a farming society where the wind was necessary to pollinate plants. The wind was a welcomed and critical aspect of their ability to grow things and to survive and to flourish. The other thing about the wind that's so beautiful is that it touches the deserving and the undeserving. It reaches everyone. And so he was as generous as the wind during Ramadan, though he was generous the whole year. And so this aspect of helping and reaching more people than you normally reach, during this month, that this is a month of immense generosity and immense rahmah. I'm reminded of the beautiful image in my homeland, really my place of birth, which is Egypt, where we have these, in many Muslim majority countries, I'm sure Qatar is one of them, Ma'idat al-Rahman, right? It's the table of Rahman, of Ar-Rahman, where it's food donated, anyone can eat. No one's gonna even ask you if you were fasting or if you're even Muslim. It's for everybody. And I think this beautiful image of just streets and alleys of just these tables of food at iftar time capture this image of the communal generosity and indiscriminate acts of kindness that we should normalize during this month.
Wonderfully described, and I've heard from many people before who've had Ramadan in Egypt that it's one of the best places to experience Ramadan. So I think you've just maybe visualized it for me. So it's Ma'idat al-Rahman, that kind of anybody can come and sit down and everybody breaking bread side by side. So therefore you're seeing and explaining Ramadan as being more than a spiritual exercise. I was hoping you could explain a little bit more by, if it's not just a spiritual exercise, it's more than that, then what is that additional element? What's that X factor?
You know, I think Ramadan needs to be the fuel, the spiritual fuel for us to work for a better, more just, more compassionate society. And why it's such a powerful fuel toward that is because it restrains and puts under control, at least in theory, the drives that lead to the opposite of that, the drives that lead to oppression, the drives that lead to usurping other people's rights. Those drives are greed, lust for power, unchecked anger. And they're all things that we're supposed to learn to master during Ramadan as like a spiritual boot camp for 30 days. It's also a time where we are told to part with the things that we're attached to. For me, the first thing is coffee, right? The whole day I can't drink coffee. That's a major struggle. But it's also parting with our wealth. Many people choose to give their zakah during Ramadan. And even if you're not giving your zakah, we're encouraged to give sadaqah the whole month. And so by harnessing this spiritual energy, we should feel that inspiration to work for a more just society. The second thing that Ramadan helps us with, I mean, in a very practical sense, is it teaches us what it feels like to be hungry. Many of us who are, you know, in this privileged state of, we never even have to feel hunger except when we're fasting, while some people live and experience hunger every single day. And so when we then have this experiential empathy for those who may go hungry all year, it can inspire us in a different kind of way than had we not felt it, to invest in developing systems where that is no longer the case, things that are sustainable. So I can think of nothing better than the experience of Ramadan to inspire work towards social justice.
What is this form of experiential empathy? I mean, it sounds a bit abstract to me at first, but let's say going from 2 years of Ramadan that was isolated, like you said, we were isolated from the community, and now being back into the community, are we a bit out of practice with being with the community? So what is this form of empathy? And then how powerful is it then in terms of helping us to serve others?
Yeah, well, I think experiential empathy is as powerful when we were on lockdown as when we weren't, and perhaps even more powerful. What I mean by experiential empathy is the empathy gained when you experience yourself someone else's struggle rather than just sort of hear about it. And so I think the thirst and hunger of Ramadan, especially when it used to be in the summer, can truly transform how we think about investing in alleviating suffering. You know, I'll just give you a simple example. Ramadan is one example where we experience something that we might not otherwise. I recently returned from Jerusalem, and I was my first time. I'd never been there before. And so I'd never experienced firsthand what it feels like to live or even have a slight experience of occupation. What does that actually mean? To be stopped in just doing simple things every day, trying just to go pray, and there's a checkpoint. There's militarized police everywhere I look. And I'm the most privileged because I have an American passport. I'm relatively safe from the soldiers, but everyone around me's entire life is lived under this backbreaking weight of occupation, which I always knew about, I'd always heard about, I'd always seen documentaries about, but it was an entirely different reality when I was actually there witnessing it and even tasting a little bit of it myself in terms of my level of experiential empathy. And I left those 10 days in Jerusalem with a newfound commitment to work for a free Palestine that was there but latent or passive, and now it's much more alive. So I think this idea of experiential empathy is incredibly important, because we are all, in theory, want to do better and want to commit to better social justice. But when we taste a little bit of that hardship ourselves, I think it does something. It triggers something. It clicks something, new clicks inside us where we have a different level of commitment.
Definitely, and subhanAllah, may Allah ease the pain and suffering that is going on with the occupation of our brothers and sisters in Palestine. I mean, right now in this holiest of month, and one of our third holiest places in Islam, we see on the news sometimes, it's just so painful to watch that they can't even pray in peace, they can't even fast in peace, or break their fast in peace, and probably being dragged and handcuffed while they're fasting. We ask Allah to end this plight on our brothers and our sisters. And just something that you mentioned right now, you said you're an American, but when you're walking out there and you have your hijab, nobody gets to see your passport. So that reality could actually be scary, because before they realize you're an American, who knows if you're even accosted and treated the same exact way that the Palestinians and the actual people of the land are treated. So how did that feel? Like you said, I think it's not an experience anymore, it's a reality. Can you elaborate?
Right. I mean, you can't really tell who's an American and who's not when you're just walking down the street. But checkpoints are so frequent and so omnipresent that you're always showing your ID. There's always an ID that you have to show, so you can't actually leave your hotel without your passport. So you're constantly your American passport is on you all the time because you always have to show it. And I just want to point something out. This, I think, is quite important. I was able to pray all of my salawat, all of my salah in Masjid al-Aqsa when I was there. Fajr and all of them, and I'd walk with a group, into the old city and pray at Masjid al-Aqsa. And we were coming from the United States, like 7,000 miles away, and we were able to do that. But there are Palestinians who live 5 miles away who have never seen the masjid, have never been allowed in, have never had access to the masjid that is in their own, land. So I want to recognize that privilege that we all have if we have these passports, and to actually make use of it. That's what everyone was telling me, is tell others to come.
So you took something from that experience that then gave you a new drive, a new purpose. So what can we take from Ramadan that we can use to harness a drive within us to do an action that can benefit humanity, and then how do we do it?
I always put Ramadan is a time of, it's a preparation for the rest of the year. It's like boot camp. So I advise myself and others to have one thing, not to overwhelm yourself, but to have one thing that you're going to eliminate during Ramadan, one thing that you're going to continue to do, and then one thing that you're going to now start doing that you haven't been doing before. Add one good habit. And for that spiritual jolt that we are supposed to have from engaging more with the Quran, from more salah, from just the act of fasting and restraining our drives for Allah, to harness that and to channel it into something that you care about, that you're passionate about, that benefits humanity. Don't let this month end without a reinvestment in service. I really think of, people will look at us and think that Ramadan is about starvation. And instead, it's about spiritual growth, solidarity, and social justice. So that's what Ramadan is about. So don't let this month end without investing in those three things.
Could you say that again? It was just so beautiful. Spiritual growth, solidarity, and
social justice.
Social justice. That's S, S, and S. Spiritual growth, solidarity, and social justice. I mean, if you just like to kind of remind yourself of that acronym. But I also want to remind our audience, if they're joining us now, to please continue posting their questions on the Q&A section of this webinar, and we'll try to get to as many of them before the end of this discussion. Sister Dalia, I saw a beautiful quote recently which said, "The greatest door to friendship with the Creator is through serving His creation." How does that fit with the modern understanding of social justice? What part of social justice is service? Is there an equation? Is it 10%, 20%? What part of social justice?
I think social justice is all about service. It's all working for social justice is how we serve God, by serving His creation. And serving His creation first means eliminating the conditions that are causing their suffering. And in many cases, that's about an injustice of some kind. So, I've heard a quote that said, "Don't be so eager to do charity that you forget to do justice." And I think that's a very powerful way to think about it. We can sometimes feel good about ourselves that we're putting a Band-Aid on a problem rather than looking to its root cause. And I want to share a story from the Seerah that I think captures this idea so beautifully. And I'm very happy to be able to share it with your audience, because I think it's a story that very few people hear, and yet it has such immense meaning. It's a story. I've studied the Seerah for probably 2 decades, and I've only just recently learned the story. But it's one about the Prophet ﷺ when he was during the Hijrah, during the actual journey from Mecca to Medina, with Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu and their non-Muslim guide. And if you're familiar with this, with the Hijrah and with the Seerah in general, what you know is that the Hijrah was an incredibly dangerous journey for the Prophet ﷺ, because the Meccans were basically, he was a wanted fugitive, and they had put a prize on his head of 100 camels, which was a treasure. This is a fortune. So he had to go through he had to go to such great lengths to escape their capture. And if you know the details, he actually went, a different direction. So if Medina is north, he actually first went south so that he would throw them off his trail. He hid for days in a cave. When he would meet people, they would not disclose who he was. There were all these things that they had to do. They went to great lengths to avoid capture. So there was one section of the road where the guide said, if we go straight through here, through this mountain pass, it's going to be dangerous because it is basically terrorized by these two bandits who, you know, mug and steal and sometimes even murder anyone that goes down this road. So we need to avoid this road and go around. And the Prophet ﷺ said, no, I actually take me to these men. Not only are we not going to avoid it, and not only are we going to or take our chances and go down the road, no, I actually want to go and meet them. I want to go talk to them. So the guide was quite surprised, but you know, he was being hired to guide, so he took him to this road. And the two thieves saw the Prophet first before he saw them. They were hiding from a place, you know, off the road. And they said to each other, this is how the story goes, that's the Yamani, meaning that's the man from Mecca. They knew who he was. They knew exactly who he was and the prize on his head and all of this. So if you're afraid of regular people taking you for this huge prize money, these two thieves, people who are actual criminals, would even be more dangerous. And yet he risked his own life to save their souls, to save the souls of two criminals. And so he met them finally, he saw them, and he sat with them, and he basically appealed to their fitrah and invited them to Islam. And they accepted. And then he said, what are your names? And they said, we are called the humiliated. They didn't even have individual names. They were known as a collective. And the Prophet ﷺ said, no, you are the noble. He completely reframed their identity. And then here's the key. He invited them to come with him to Medina. So what do we call people who knew the Prophet ﷺ, saw him, shook his hand, and walked with him? We call them Sahaba. And that's what these two men became. And he didn't leave them in their little mountain pass. Okay, now you believe in Allah, alhamdulillah, see you later. He brought them into the community. This is like a re-entry process so that they would have a sustainable way to live righteously. If he leaves them in their environment where they had no other choice but to steal, they very well could have gone back to their old way of life. And so the key point is he actually brought them with him to Medina. So what do we draw from this unbelievable story, in my opinion, is the power of spirituality and social justice, and that they are intertwined in our faith. They are interlinked. They're not two separate things. This was a man who had so much faith and desire to save them that he risked his own safety after he had done all of that to avoid capture, to go and seek out criminals who could very well have sold him out. But it was more important to save their souls. And then that was the spiritual part. He didn't leave them. He brought them into the community. That's the social justice part. So that they could start a new life now that their heart had been healed.
MashaAllah, tabarakallah. That's a beautiful story, and I have not heard it myself before, but really it just again shows how the Prophet ﷺ was a mercy to everybody that he met, and a mercy to all of mankind, as was stated in the Quran, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. This selflessness, taking the path with the harder of the two paths, but because there's the mission of maybe finding two lost souls and helping them out, helping them have a purpose. Jazakallah khairan for sharing that. It was really beautiful, and I want to tie this in. It's a beautiful segue you're giving me, because as Muslims, we're taught from a very early age about, you know, this concept of ummah, or one community. But I want to ask you, especially if you can kind of go back to what you were saying earlier when you were in Jerusalem, what does that look like today when we're saying that we want to help others? Which community should we prioritize, the local or the global? Especially in this time where we have multiple crises. So there's just too many fires to kind of, you know, that need fighting, that we need to turn off. So how do you, I guess, how do you figure out which community to serve, and how do you do it the right way?
It's a really hard question, but I think the guidance for that is in the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ about the rights of neighbors. We have to ask ourselves, where can we make the biggest difference? And start with our spheres of influence. We have huge spheres of concern, but the more we can work in our spheres of influence, which is first ourselves, then our families, then the people around us, the more effective we'll be. And then, you know, when it comes to global issues, I think we need to specialize. We can't all do everything. So we need to divide and conquer. Some folks have to really focus on what's happening in China, and they need to understand every detail about it, and they need to know the name of every congressman and woman who's working on this issue with the Uyghur Muslims, and focus on that. And we need to support them as much as we can, but there needs to be specialization. There needs to be specialization regarding Palestine. There needs to be specialization regarding the Muslims in Myanmar and so forth. Muslims in Africa. It's, I think that the best way to approach it is through both local action and then some kind of specialization. Not everyone is going to be able to do everything, and not everyone's going to be able to be a specialist at every cause. But our hearts at least have to be tugged by what is happening around us and what is happening globally to humanity at large. We have to find it, you know, find it in our hearts for our compassion to extend beyond our own small bubble.
Thank you very much for sharing that. I think at least there's a recipe, right? Like you said, start with your sphere of influence, and even when making da'wah, the Prophet ﷺ started with his inner household before going to the rest of the Meccans, and then after that, when they were forced to leave, then the other communities that were surrounding Mecca. So that was very beautiful, and I'd like to now open it to some of the questions that we've been receiving from the audience to you. We have a question here from on Facebook asking, younger generations are being distracted by technology, the gadgets, and etc. So how can we instill in them not only the importance of Ramadan, but also other notions like spirituality, serving the community, and other things?
When you find out, let me know. As the mother of two teenagers, well, one is not a teenager anymore. He's almost 22, but yeah, alhamdulillah. I think we have to bring these things and make them relevant to young people. I don't think we're, you know, I don't think that it's always going to be the way that we learned about them or the way that you know, it struck us or is relevant to us. But we have to start by listening. We have to start by understanding where young people are coming from, what they truly care about, and reach them where they are. But at the end of the day, young people and old people all have basic human needs, and one of those needs is a sense of purpose. We think our young people are content just, you know, like living on their phones and not caring about anything, but they're actually not. They may not know where to find that purpose, but it is an innate human need. And if we can help connect their interests and their passions to that sense of purpose, to a purpose, I think we'll be surprised at how committed they can be to those same causes. But a sense of belonging and a sense of purpose is an innate human need that our young people have. And if we don't help them connect to those things in the right way, they will find a way to fulfill those needs, honestly, somewhere else. So don't ever be fooled into thinking that our kids don't need purpose or they don't care about purpose. They absolutely do. I think we just need to start doing a better job of listening.
Very nicely said. As somebody who works with with the Education City Mosque here, you said to go to the young people. Do you see the mosque? If they are not coming to the mosque, should the mosque go to them? I mean, could you help me, square that circle?
Well, I definitely think the mosque should go to them, but let's first ask, why aren't they coming to the mosque? And it may not be anything that the mosque can do differently, but in some cases, there are different ways to create programming where more young people will come to the mosque. So that's the first question, is why aren't they coming to the mosque? We've done research at ISPU on making mosques more engaging and inclusive of young people, women, and converts. And what we found in that research is that, especially when it comes to young people, the more they have, the more empowered they are to create their own programming, which I know can be somewhat tricky in different mosques, but to actually be able to organize their own educational activities or their own service activities, where the masjid becomes like a platform that they feel some kind of shared ownership with. They do come. It actually does pull them in. So if they're not coming, we might just ask, what can we do to bring them, to attract them? And then I love the idea of the mosque should go to them. I think that's that's certainly what the Prophet ﷺ did. His da'wah was never limited to one space.
And the story that you just mentioned about him taking that path where he wanted to go to them, so that was definitely, again, going to find them where they were, and making them feel included, not isolated. There's a question here on Twitter talking about social justice, the term itself. It seems to be a controversial term now to some in the younger generation, given all the wars and the conflicts around the world. So how can we, and this is a parent asking, explain this to our kids who are growing up in a world that seemingly is lacking social justice?
Yes, it is, and more the reason to commit ourselves to it. I have no real attachment to the term itself, but I think what we're all saying is that as believers, we have to work for a world where we are bearing witness to justice. I mean, it's an injunction in the Quran, in Surah An-Nisa, of course, of all the surahs, that's this gem of an ayah about bearing witness to justice. So it's not something we can decide to ignore. It's an injunction, it's a commandment of God that we should be people who work for justice. And that's all we're really saying. So we can always just take it back to the basics and use any term we want. Social justice is more like a shorthand for working for a society where people are treated fairly.
Excellent. There's a question here on Facebook that says, could you please tell us more about how women can balance between their motherhood and spiritual lives during Ramadan? There are many moms complaining about not having enough time to pray. And can we consider their hard work into making food, helping kids with their homework as a sort of ibadah?
I totally understand the struggle. Alhamdulillah, my kids are now older, so they don't really need me very much. But I totally understand when they were younger, this was a huge, huge struggle for me. And the answer is all of these things that we're doing for our children, of course, are a form of ibadah. I mean, when you read the ahadith about just nursing your child, that every drop of milk is a sadaqah. I mean, imagine that. Imagine the honor of that. And so a lot of mothers who are breastfeeding can't fast, very difficult to go to Taraweeh, and they're feeling bad about it. They're feeling like they aren't doing everything that everyone else gets to do in Ramadan, whereas you might be doing 10 times more from, you know, what you're providing your child. So I suggest that we get educated on the rewards of the actions of motherhood. And there is no faith on earth that honors mothers and the supposedly mundane acts of motherhood more than Islam. Like there's nothing even close. Everything from nursing to, you know, just the act of being pregnant, caring for your child, all of these things are hugely rewarded. Now, I think it's still important, despite the fact that everything you're doing is ibadah, to actually also have some time quietly to spend with Allah in dhikr or in reading Quran. And so if you're able, even for 15 minutes a day while your child is sleeping, to just sit quietly and do adhkar, or just do dua, read Quran, do whatever engages your heart most. I think it's very important to make that time, and don't feel bad that it's a small amount of time, because Allah sees all that you're doing.
Indeed. There's a question here in Microsoft Teams, from Microsoft Teams, saying that trust in charity organizations is also somehow decreasing. So what can we do to aid social justice causes in a way that is effective? And what do grassroots organizations need to do to regain trust and be effective? What is lacking?
So I'm sorry to hear that charity organizations are losing trust. I'm just going to speak for what I know, which is the United States kind of environment. We have a lot of different independent agencies that grade charities, give them like a star rating on transparency, on effectiveness, and on waste and so forth. So we're able to see you know, how well our charities do, and Muslim charities almost always are like the top in terms of their transparency, their ethics, and their effectiveness. And that's something I think that we should all take great pride in. I don't want us to get into an assumption that all charities are mismanaged and wasting your money. The reason I say that is because we need collective resources to do things that require like larger sums of money. We're not going to build a hospital if we don't have a charity to collect the money. If I'm just working on my own and I don't trust charity, so I'm going to give my zakat directly to somebody, that's fine. And I think you should always do that with your sadaqah. But there is power, and there's a reason why in Islam zakat is collected by the state. I mean, traditionally, because you need that collective resource to do big things, like build a hospital or build a school or even dig a well. You can't do it with everyone giving one-off hundreds of dollars, you know, to to people who on the street who need money. So I want to discourage us from losing all hope or losing all faith in charities. I think find the right charity and then invest in that charity, because it's only through collective action that we'll truly be able to make an impact. It's not going to be individual actions doing random things on our own.
Thank you for that. And maybe it's that question, I mean, I can see where it's coming from too. You know, it's Ramadan and everybody's feeling generous. And, you know, if you open almost any platform, especially the social media, there's always an ad popping up, you know, saying they're building a mosque. And so I think people do have to do their homework, as you said, to find, you know, trusted, you know, organizations that have been rated by, you know, again, trusted bodies, or, you know, where, you know, when you give them the money, you know, where it's going to actually go. So we have to do a little bit of homework. Thank you for saying that. So it's not all organizations. Of course, there's some that are very storied and established, and they've done so many great things around the world. Just a couple more questions, because we're almost getting to the end of our time here. There's a question here also on from Microsoft Teams saying, how can we support Muslim minority groups that are being oppressed in a way that is impactful? So here it's more about the minority groups in other parts of the world. We're seeing so many things going on today. I think in India, you know, in China, it's still going on, and in Myanmar, a couple of years back, not too long ago, even in Sri Lanka, you know, places where we didn't really expect to see, you know, Muslims being attacked, where Muslims have been there for generations and are part of the, you know, demographic.
Yeah, I think one of the most powerful things we can do is to raise awareness about their plight. You know, use your voice, use your platform to make people aware of what is happening, because in most of these cases, the news, the mainstream news, isn't really covering it, with the exception of, you know, maybe, I think Al Jazeera probably does more than anyone else, but, you know, in the United States, it's not a story that's on MSNBC that Muslims in India are being oppressed. That's a very rare, you know, event that something like that would be covered. So we can use our own voices to spread awareness, and that's going to be the first thing and the most powerful thing we can do as individuals. Now, when we have more influence, the people that can really make a difference for Muslim minorities around the country, around the world, are other governments. It's a government to government thing. That's who really has leverage. And so if we live in a part of the world where we're able to actually influence our own government, to put pressure on these other governments to stop oppressing Muslims, I think that's the second thing that we can do that can be very powerful.
In case in point, we can see that very point which you said about, you know, people are doing things, but with the whole Ukraine, the crisis in Ukraine right now, governments are also stepping up, and they've taken, you know, a stand, and we're seeing that, you know, whether it's the European Union or countries that are members of NATO and other countries around the world at the United Nations General Assembly. Before we wrap up the Q&A session, I'd like to ask you, Sister Dalia, if there's any advice that you'd like to give the audience, especially as we're approaching the last 10 days of Ramadan.
My biggest advice for this halfway point, we're almost about to start the last 10 days, is don't feel bad if you didn't do everything you wanted to in the first 10 days. We are always, you know, in Islam, alhamdulillah, things are by the way they end. And so have hope, you know, harness all the spiritual energy you have. Don't look back with regret, look forward with optimism. And do those three things. Eliminate one bad habit, continue doing one good thing that you have been doing, and then add one more thing that you're going to commit to doing for the rest of the month, inshallah.
Thank you all so much for your questions, and there are still more questions actually coming from the audience, and I really wish we could get around to more of them, but I'm afraid the time is nearly running out. But before we close, I'd like to announce and share something. I'd like to let you all know about a new digital education platform from Qatar Foundation, which will soon be launching, called Walk with Muhammad, the Prophet ﷺ. This will showcase the journey of the Prophet ﷺ, peace be upon him, and is designed to enhance understanding and conversation about the Islamic faith around the world. So please stay tuned to our QF channels to find out more. It's coming soon. Sister Dalia, thank you for taking the time to be here with us today for this edition of the Education City Speaker Series, and for sharing your insights and perspectives and some of the research that you're also working on at ISPU that I'm sure will inspire all of us to think even more deeply about the meaning, the importance, and the broader societal and humanitarian impact of Ramadan. Is it fair to say that President Obama was your boss at one point in time?
That would be a very huge exaggeration. I served on advisory council to the White House, but he was not. He's never. He was not your boss. But to kind of borrow from some of his statement, after hearing you, I'm fired up and ready to go. You know, fired up, and I'm sure a lot of our audience members also fired up after hearing what you've said. And again, we probably even need to reread the Seerah, and this is what this hopefully initiative that's coming out from Qatar Foundation with Walk with Muhammad will help us to do, to be able to read it, even if you read it for 2 decades or you read it for more times than that. There's always something to learn from it. It just depends on where you are in what point you are in your life. Have you faced that situation yet or not? To be able to kind of know. So thank you very much, all of you, and thank you very much, Sister Dalia, for joining us, for sharing your insights. I hope this is the first of many, and I pray that we get a chance to see you in person back here in Qatar. And thank you all for joining us this evening. And remember, you can rewatch this event on Qatar Foundation's YouTube channel. And if you want to be with us again for future editions of the Education City Speaker Series, please keep checking www.qf.org.qa/ECSS for the next event, because it's not too far away. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and once again, Ramadan Mubarak to all of you, and to your loved ones, and to your families, and to your neighbors, and to the entire human family. Jazakallahu khairan.